There are some books that teach you how to do things, and then there are books that quietly change the way you see. This is one of those books. More than 400 years ago, a wandering swordsman sat alone in a cave, knowing his life was nearing its end. He had no home, no school, no disciples beside him, only clarity. His name was Miyamoto Musashi, a man who fought over 60 duels, never lost once, and yet insisted that victory in combat was the least important lesson he had learned. What he chose to leave behind was not a story of battles, but a manual for perception, a guide to seeing reality without distortion. That book is the Book of Five Rings. Despite its origins in swordsmanship, this is not a book about violence. It is a book about timing, awareness, discipline, and clarity of mind. It speaks to warriors, artists, leaders, and anyone who wants to move through life without hesitation or fear. In this video, we will walk through Musashi's philosophy section by section, not as history, not as theory, but as something alive and practical. Because Musashi was never interested in ideas, he was interested in what works. Miyamoto Musashi begins the Book of Five Rings with the ground book, and this is not accidental. Before he talks about technique, before strategy, before timing or mind, he starts with something far more basic: how you see the world. Musashi understood something most people miss. If your foundation is wrong, every advanced technique built on top of it will fail. In swordsmanship, this means you can memorize moves, study forms, even win practice bouts, but the moment reality deviates from expectation, you freeze. In life, it's the same. People collapse not because they lack intelligence or effort, but because their understanding of reality is distorted. The ground book is about removing that distortion. Musashi says, "You must understand that there is more than one path to the top of the mountain." This single line already tells us what kind of thinker he was. He rejected rigid schools. He rejected blind tradition. He rejected the idea that truth belongs to authority. Instead, he insisted on direct observation. Not what you were told, not what you prefer, not what comforts you, what is actually happening. Musashi warns that many martial schools become obsessed with surface-level elegance, beautiful stances, elaborate movements, impressive rituals. But when faced with real combat, those same practitioners hesitate. Why? Because they trained for appearance, not reality. Musashi calls this decorative swordsmanship, and this idea extends far beyond combat. Most people live decorative lives. They adopt beliefs, identities, and goals that look respectable: success, relationships, status, productivity. But they never ask whether these things actually lead to clarity or strength. They copy forms without understanding function. Musashi insists that the way must be grounded in what works, not what looks impressive. He says that strategy is not something mystical or intellectual. It is simply the study of cause and effect. If you do this, that happens. If you hesitate here, you lose ground. If you rush there, you expose yourself. Reality is always responding impartially. And this is where Musashi becomes uncomfortable for modern minds, because he does not offer reassurance, he offers responsibility. He tells us that if you are confused, it is because you have not looked carefully enough. If you are defeated, it is because you misunderstood timing or distance, not fate, not luck, not other people. Understanding reality clearly is not about optimism or pessimism. It is about accuracy. Musashi repeatedly emphasizes the ordinary. He says the way is found in daily things, how you walk, how you stand, how you observe, not in rare moments of inspiration. This is crucial. Most people wait for motivation. Musashi trained perception. He believed that greatness comes from refining fundamentals until nothing is wasted. Even your posture matters. He criticizes exaggerated stances and dramatic movements, saying they reveal insecurity rather than strength. A balanced stance, he says, is one that can change instantly. In life, the same applies. If your identity is rigid, I am this kind of person, I don't do that, I must always be seen this way, you lose adaptability. You become predictable. Musashi valued flexibility grounded in stability, not chaos, not recklessness, but readiness. The Ground Book also emphasizes long-term perspective. Musashi warns against seeking quick victories. He says those who rush for small wins often sacrifice the larger position, something any strategist, investor, or leader eventually learns the hard way. He writes that true strategy sees the whole battlefield, not just the immediate clash. This requires patience. But patience does not mean passivity. It means acting without panic. One of Musashi's most important ideas is that you must train as if you are already in combat and fight as if you are still training. In other words, no separation between practice and reality. Most people behave differently when things are serious. Their clarity disappears under pressure. Musashi saw this as a failure of preparation. If your understanding is deep enough, pressure changes nothing. Another subtle but powerful idea in the Ground Book is self-knowledge. Musashi believed that you must understand your own tendencies, your fear, impatience, pride, as clearly as you understand your opponent. An enemy does not defeat you, your reaction does. He warns that attachment to winning, reputation, or proving yourself creates openings the opponent can exploit. This is why Musashi often fought with unconventional weapons, wooden swords, longer blades, even two swords, not to show off, but to disrupt expectation. He understood that most people fight the image in their mind, not the situation in front of them. When expectation breaks, panic enters. The Ground Book teaches you to remove expectation altogether. Just see, just respond, just move when movement is required. Musashi also makes it clear that the way of strategy is not limited to combat. He explicitly says it applies to all professions. Carpenters, he notes, understand structure. Farmers understand timing. Craftsmen understand efficiency. Strategy is simply applied awareness. And this is perhaps the most radical thing Musashi offers. He does not divide life into sacred and mundane. Everything is training. How you listen, how you wait, how you notice small shifts. If you cannot manage small things, you cannot manage great ones. By the end of the Ground Book, Musashi has not taught you how to strike. He has taught you how to stand on solid ground, without illusion, without fantasy, without unnecessary movement. Only after this foundation is laid does he move on, because without ground, every step is unstable. In the Water Book, Miyamoto Musashi moves from foundation to movement. If the Ground Book teaches you how to stand, the Water Book teaches you how to change. Musashi chose water deliberately. Water has no fixed shape. It conforms without losing its nature. It can drip, flow, crash, or remain still, all without hesitation. This is exactly how he believed a strategist should move through the world. Most people cling to a single way of acting, one approach, one identity, one correct method. Musashi saw this as fragility. Water survives because it adapts instantly. In combat, rigidity gets you killed. In life, it keeps you stuck. Musashi begins by emphasizing proper attitude. Not emotional attitude, but physical and mental alignment. He warns against tension. A tense body is slow. A tense mind is blind. He describes holding the sword neither tightly nor loosely, firm enough to act, relaxed enough to change. This balance is crucial. Too much control creates stiffness. Too little creates chaos. The same applies beyond combat. People who try to control everything become brittle. People who surrender all structure become lost. Water teaches balance. Musashi then speaks about rhythm. Everything has rhythm. Conversation, conflict, work, relationships. When two rhythms clash, friction occurs. When one rhythm dominates, the other collapses. Victory, Musashi says, is not about strength. It is about entering the opponent's rhythm and breaking it. This is profound. Most people try to overpower situations. Musashi tried to understand timing. He writes about moments, openings that exist only briefly. Strike too early and you expose yourself. Strike too late and the moment is gone. Water flows when the opening appears. This applies everywhere. In conversation, speak too soon and you sound desperate. Speak too late and the moment passes. In opportunity, hesitate and it disappears. Rush and you misjudge. The Water Book trains sensitivity. Musashi also emphasizes seeing distance clearly, not just physical distance, but psychological distance. Knowing when you are too close, knowing when you are too far. Many people misread distance in life. They overshare. They withdraw too much. They push when space is needed. They wait when action is required. Water adjusts naturally. Musashi teaches that techniques are not fixed moves. They are responses. A rigid technique assumes a predictable opponent, but reality is not predictable. Therefore, he says, you must not be attached to any single form. This is where Musashi openly criticizes martial arts schools. They teach named techniques, memorized sequences, stylized movements. Musashi says these become mental cages. In real combat, he writes, there is no time to recall forms, only perception and response. The Water Book demands presence, not thinking, not planning, seeing and acting as one movement. Musashi also speaks about calmness under pressure. Water does not panic when the terrain changes. It simply flows differently. When people panic, their breathing changes, their vision narrows, their decisions become impulsive. Musashi trained himself to remain ordinary in extraordinary situations. No emotional spikes, no dramatic reactions, just awareness. This is one of the most misunderstood aspects of mastery. People assume mastery looks intense. Musashi believed it looks quiet. He also warns against showing intention. If your opponent can read you, you are already behind. In daily life, this translates directly. If your insecurity is visible, it will be exploited. If your need for approval is obvious, it will control you. Water reveals nothing until it moves. Another key teaching here is initiative. Musashi distinguishes between reacting and taking the initiative within flow. This is subtle,
Taking initiative does not mean forcing action. It means sensing when the opponent is unsettled and moving with that instability. In life, opportunities often arise when systems are already shifting. Those who wait for perfect certainty miss them. Those who force action create resistance. Water moves at the moment resistance weakens. Musashi also discusses feints and deception, but not as tricks. He treats them as natural consequences of adaptability. When you are not fixed, unpredictability arises on its own. You don't need to deceive deliberately. Your flexibility does it for you. By the end of the Water Book, Musashi has reshaped the idea of skill. Skill is not repetition. Skill is responsiveness, not dominance, not control, but harmony with change. Water wins not by opposing force, but by outlasting and outmaneuvering it.
If the ground book is about seeing clearly, and the water book is about adapting smoothly, then the fire book is about what happens when things collide. This is where Miyamoto Musashi becomes most direct. Fire is combat. Fire is crisis. Fire is the moment when theory collapses and only action remains. Musashi does not romanticize this. He treats conflict as something inevitable, not only in duels, but in life itself. Avoiding conflict does not make you peaceful, it makes you unprepared. The Fire Book is about meeting resistance without fear. Musashi begins by emphasizing presence under pressure. When conflict arises, most people leave the moment. Their mind jumps to outcomes, winning, losing, reputation, damage control. Musashi calls this fatal. The moment you think about results, you stop seeing what is actually happening. Fire demands total attention, not anger, not aggression, but clarity. He speaks about maintaining a calm, ordinary mind even while striking decisively. This seems contradictory to modern thinking. People believe intensity creates effectiveness. Musashi believed intensity blinds. True decisiveness comes from seeing clearly and acting without hesitation. He then discusses initiative in battle. Musashi identifies several kinds of initiative, taking the lead, responding at the exact moment, or acting as the opponent commits. But what matters is not the category. What matters is seizing the moment when balance breaks. Every conflict contains instability. The person who senses it first wins. This applies far beyond combat. Arguments escalate because people miss the moment to de-escalate. Opportunities disappear because people hesitate at the point of commitment. Careers stall because people wait for certainty that never arrives. Musashi did not wait for certainty. He trained to recognize when action was required. He also emphasizes closing distance. Hesitation creates gaps. Gaps create danger. In swordsmanship, this is literal. In life, it's psychological. People stay in indecision for years, half committed, half afraid. Musashi would see this as weakness, not morally, but structurally. A blade held halfway is ineffective. A decision made halfway creates suffering. One of the most striking teachings in the Fire Book is Musashi's insistence on overwhelming the moment. He says that when the time comes to strike, you must strike fully, not violently, decisively. Half actions prolong conflict. This is uncomfortable advice for many people. They want safety without risk, resolution without commitment. Musashi understood that unresolved conflict drains more energy than decisive action ever could. He also talks about breaking the opponent's spirit, but not in a cruel sense. He means disrupting confidence. When someone loses internal balance, their technique collapses. In life, people rarely fail because of external obstacles. They fail when self-doubt enters. Musashi trained himself to project certainty, not arrogance, but steadiness. Fire consumes hesitation. Another key idea in the Fire Book is awareness of terrain. In combat, terrain determines movement. In life, context does. Arguing in the wrong setting, pushing ideas at the wrong time, forcing change without understanding environment. Musashi never separated action from context. Power without awareness is wasted. He also warns against tunnel vision. Under pressure, people fixate on one threat and ignore everything else. Musashi trained himself to see broadly, even in close combat. He writes about using peripheral vision, seeing the whole situation, not just the blade. This is crucial. Most mistakes happen because people focus too narrowly. They win the argument and lose their relationship. They get the promotion and lose their health. They solve one problem while creating 3 others. Fire teaches total awareness under stress. Musashi also rejects emotional excess. He says anger, excitement, and fear all cloud judgment. This does not mean suppressing emotion. It means not obeying it. Fire burns hottest when controlled. Perhaps the most important lesson in the Fire Book is this: conflict is not the enemy. Confusion is. Musashi did not fear battle. He feared misjudgment. That is why he trained endlessly, not to become aggressive, but to become clear. When action is required, clarity removes hesitation. When hesitation disappears, action becomes natural. The Fire Book ends not with triumph, but with realism. Victory is temporary. Conflict will return. Pressure is part of existence. The question is not whether you will face fire. The question is whether you will meet it awake. After ground, water, and fire, Musashi turns to something unexpected. He turns outward. The Wind Book is not about technique at all. It is about understanding other ways of thinking, and more importantly, understanding why they fail. Wind here means style, tradition, school, doctrine. Musashi believed that if you only know your own path, your understanding is incomplete. You may become skilled, but you will also become blind. So he studies other martial schools, not to mock them, but to expose a deeper problem: attachment to form. Musashi noticed that many schools became obsessed with identity. Their way was the best. Their techniques were correct. Their rituals were authentic. Over time, the school became more important than reality. And when reality changed, they couldn't. This is one of Musashi's most relevant teachings today. People don't just attach to techniques. They attach to belief systems, labels, ideologies, self-images. I am this kind of person. This is how things should be done. This is the right way. Musashi saw this as dangerous, because once you defend a system, you stop seeing clearly. In the Wind Book, he explains that many schools misunderstand distance, timing, and posture, not because they lack intelligence, but because they prioritize tradition over observation. They copy what worked in the past without checking if it still works now. This is how practices decay. The form remains, the function disappears. Musashi warns against being impressed by surface mastery, fancy techniques, complicated movements, esoteric terminology. He says complexity often hides confusion. True mastery looks simple, even boring, because nothing extra remains. This is uncomfortable for the ego. The ego wants distinction, it wants uniqueness, it wants to belong to something special. Musashi refused this. He deliberately avoided founding a formal school, not because he rejected teaching, but because he rejected institutional blindness. Once something becomes a system, people protect the system rather than truth. Another key theme in the Wind Book is misplaced emphasis. Some schools focus too much on speed, others on strength, others on timing alone. Musashi says this fragmentation destroys balance. Reality does not separate itself neatly. Timing without awareness fails. Strength without positioning fails. Speed without judgment fails. He insists that seeing the whole matters more than mastering parts. This applies directly to modern life. People optimize productivity and lose meaning. They chase self-improvement and lose peace. They refine skills and neglect perception. Musashi would say, "You are training fragments, not the way." He also speaks about false confidence. Many practitioners become confident because they succeed in controlled conditions, friendly matches, rehearsed scenarios, predictable environments. But the first time something unexpected happens, they collapse. Musashi trained specifically for unpredictability. He believed the purpose of training was not to confirm your skill, but to expose your weakness. This is a hard lesson. Most people train to feel good. Musashi trained to remove illusion. The Wind Book also teaches humility, but not the performative kind. Musashi was not modest, he was accurate. He knew what he could do, and more importantly, what he could not. This kept him alive. He warns that arrogance blinds faster than ignorance. When you believe you already know, learning stops. Perhaps the most subtle teaching in the Wind Book is this: do not confuse description with reality. Schools describe the way in words. They label techniques. They explain concepts. Musashi says these descriptions are not the thing itself. Clinging to explanations instead of experience is like studying a map and never walking. This is why he insists on direct practice, direct observation, direct engagement. No intermediaries, no filters. By the end of the Wind Book, Musashi has dismantled something deeply human: the need to belong to a system that tells us who we are and how to act. He leaves you exposed. No school to hide behind, no doctrine to protect you, no style to defend, only reality, and your ability to meet it honestly. The Void Book is the final writing of Miyamoto Musashi, and it is the most difficult to understand, not because it is obscure, but because it refuses to give the mind anything to hold. Musashi does not end with technique. He does not end with victory. He ends with absence. The void. Many people misunderstand this word. They imagine darkness, nothingness, detachment from life. But Musashi meant the opposite. The void is not emptiness. It is what remains when illusion is removed. Musashi writes that the void is where there is no ignorance, no confusion, no false belief. This is critical. The void is not a special state you enter. It is what is always present once distortion disappears. Most people never experience reality directly. They experience thought about reality, memory of reality, expectation layered on top of reality. The void is perception before thought interferes, before fear, before desire, before identity. Musashi spent his entire life removing what was unnecessary, not to become passive or detached, but to become precise. He believed that confusion does not come from lack of information, but from excess. Too many techniques, too many opinions, too many explanations. The mind becomes crowded. In combat, this crowd kills you. In life, it exhausts you. The Void book teaches subtraction. Musashi says that when you truly understand the way, technique disappears. This does not mean you forget how to fight. It means technique no longer occupies the mind. The body moves without instruction. Action arises without debate. This is why Musashi says that at the highest level, there is no stance, no fixed form, no conscious method, only response. This terrifies most people, because if there is no method, there is no safety. But Musashi understood something profound. Methods are useful only until they become limitations. Once you cling to a method, you stop seeing what is happening now. The void is freedom from this clinging. Musashi also addresses thinking itself. He warns that excessive thinking is a form of delay. People believe they are preparing, but they are actually postponing action. They replay scenarios, they seek reassurance, they wait for certainty. Musashi never waited for certainty. Certainty is a luxury of hindsight. He trained to act clearly without it. The void is not reckless, it is unhesitating clarity. When the mind is quiet, action is fast, not because it is rushed, but because nothing blocks it. Musashi also speaks about fear, though indirectly. Fear does not disappear through bravery, it disappears through non-attachment. Fear exists because something is at stake: reputation, identity, outcome. When you act from the void, there is nothing to defend. You still act fully, but without self-protection. This is why Musashi could enter duels calmly, not because he didn't care about life, but because he was not negotiating with fear. He also dismantles the idea of control. Most people try to control situations, people, outcomes. Musashi saw control as a mere illusion. You cannot control reality. You can only respond accurately. The void is the point where resistance ends, not surrender, but alignment. He compares this to seeing darkness and light correctly. Darkness is not something that exists on its own. It is simply the absence of light. Ignorance is not something added. It is what remains when awareness is absent. The void is awareness without obstruction. This has nothing to do with belief systems. Musashi was not teaching Zen doctrine. He was teaching direct seeing. He warns explicitly against mistaking words for understanding. You can read the Void book and understand nothing, because the void cannot be grasped intellectually. It must be recognized. This recognition happens when effort relaxes, when striving drops, when the mind stops trying to improve itself. This is one of the most paradoxical teachings in the entire book. The moment you stop trying to become masterful, mastery appears. The moment you stop seeking clarity, clarity is present. Musashi did not mean passivity. He meant removing the false self that interferes with action. The part of you that wants credit, that wants to be right, that wants reassurance. That part creates hesitation. The void has no hesitation. Musashi ends by saying that the way exists in emptiness, not because emptiness is special, but because emptiness is unobstructed. Nothing extra, nothing missing, just reality, clearly perceived, and action naturally arising.
This is why the Void Book is short in words, but endless in depth, because once you see it, nothing more needs to be said.
Miyamoto Musashi did not write the Book of Five Rings to create followers. He wrote it to remove dependence on technique, on tradition, on certainty. He believed the way was something you must walk alone, yet verify constantly through reality. Ground teaches you to see clearly. Water teaches you to adapt. Fire teaches you to act decisively. Wind teaches you to avoid illusion. Void teaches you to let go of everything unnecessary. Together, they form not a system, but a way of being awake in the world. Musashi lived without comfort, without attachment, without reputation-seeking. And yet his influence endures because his teachings were never about swords. They were about clarity under pressure. In a world full of noise, distraction, and borrowed beliefs, that clarity is rare. And that is why this book still matters, because long after the sword is gone, the way remains.